Welcome to part 3 of 4 of the circulatory system. The picture you are looking at on the left is a capillary. Now remember, they are very, very small. And that's because that is where the oxygen, carbon dioxide, and all the other exchanges occur between the circulation and the tissues and the cells outside of the circulation. And this picture is showing red blood cells inside a capillary. And the point that they're showing here is how close the red blood cells are to the sides of the capillary. They fill up the capillary so that they have to follow one by one because they are as large as a capillary. Now, as you will have seen in lab, you will have looked at a blood smear, and red blood cells are the most numerous, but they were the smallest of the blood cells that you have. And they're the ones with the hemoglobin, and it carries the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now the picture on the right is a drawing of the same thing, and what they're showing you, the red blood cell inside the capillary, and then the interstitial fluid, which is the fluid that bathes the cells, and then the cells of the tissues. And the way oxygen and nutrients move is from higher concentration to lower concentration. If you remember back to chapter 5, diffusion was the process from higher to lower. It's a naturally occurring process of going from a higher concentration to a lower with no energy involved. And that's how O2 leaves the capillary to go to the tissue, because there's more oxygen coming from the heart, and it's going to go into the tissue that has more carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide then will diffuse to the capillary that has less carbon dioxide. Now, capillary beds are tightly controlled as to how much blood will flow through the capillaries. You remember sphincter muscles. They're round muscles that close off passageways. You remember at the top of the stomach and the below the stomach. Well, we also have capillaries or have sphincters in our capillary muscles. I'll give you an example. Your face, your cheeks. I mean, you have capillaries everywhere. That's how the blood exchange occurs. But if your muscles aren't actively working, they don't need as much blood supply as at other times. So blood supply will be decreased when things are at rest. But say you get nervous and you're shy and you blush. What's happened is that your parasympathetic nervous system is reacting and opening up the sphincter muscles of your face because of anxiety and nerves. Same thing to working muscles. If your muscles are starting to work because you're exercising, the capillaries in them are going to open up so that more blood will go into the muscles that need the oxygen and the nutrients to do the activities. So you have precapillary sphincters that control it, contract, and relax. Now, capillaries are thin and leaky. In other words, the fluid inside the capillary is going to leak out of it to the interstitial fluid outside it. At the arterial end of the capillary, which is the blood that's come from the heart and it's got more oxygen in it, there's a higher blood pressure in it, and it's full of oxygen, nutrients, and other substances. So that higher blood pressure helps push the fluid through those leaky capillaries. At the other end of the capillary, where it's entering the vein, now you've got CO2 and waste products from the tissue cells that have to pass into the capillary bloodstream. And here is a picture of it. And you can see that there's more things than just diffusion occurring, and that is important to realize that diffusion is one of the main processes, but osmosis is also going to be a factor, as well as the blood pressure that is in the capillary, because the more blood pressure, the harder it's being pushed. So the net movement is going to be, if you look at the arterial end, the blood pressure, the arrow size is indicating how big that pressure is. And blood pressure is a big component of helping to get the blood through and out of the capillary. Osmotic pressure is the pressure of pulling water through a semi-permeable membrane to an area that has lower water concentration. So there is an osmotic pressure pushing into the capillary. But the net movement, the blood pressure is higher than the osmotic pressure, so it's going to go in the direction of the blood pressure arrow. In other words, out. But as we get to the venous end of the capillary, the blood pressure isn't as high. See, by the arrow, it's narrower. Osmotic pressure hasn't changed. But because now the osmotic pressure, and go back and review osmosis because it's going to be very important in understanding it's the flow of water through a semi-permeable membrane in order to equalize out the amount of water on both sides. So there is something inside the blood vessel that is pushing the water into the blood vessel. And that's what you want. You want to pick up the fluid, the waste products, and get it inside the capillary. So the net fluid movement is into the capillary to get it out of the body, because it's going to go up to the heart and eventually to the kidneys to filter and be cleaned, and then it'll be excreted. Any waste products that gets picked up will be excreted in the kidneys. Now, how do we get the blood flow back up to the heart? Now, one of the things that I pointed out earlier was that veins have valves in them, which are controlled during the blood pressure and the flow of the heart. And these valves are only one direction. They stop the flow of blood back down away from the heart. They only permit blood flow toward the heart. In addition, this is showing a skeletal muscle down in your calf. Very powerful muscles down there. And when you're walking, these muscles are pushing and squeezing and also helping to push the fluid up to the heart. So the muscles as well as the valves are working together to get the blood flow up against gravity to the heart. Now, we have quite a bit of blood in our body, 5 liters or 11 pints of blood, and of the total volume of the blood, 45% are solid cells, solid matter, and 55% is plasma, which is consisting of 90% water and 10% of some salts, protein, and other molecules that are just dissolved in the fluid. Just like salt dissolves in water, you have dissolved salts, proteins, and molecules inside the water of the plasma. So here we have a tube of blood that was put into something called a centrifuge that spins it, and all the blood cells, or the solid components, the cells, fall to the bottom because they're heavier. And the fluid, or the watery component, goes to the top. So if you look on the right side of this circle, the cellular components include red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. They're all formed elements. In other words, like you can pick it and touch it up if they were big enough. On the other side is the plasma, which is 55%. So that's why it's a little more than half of the circle. Most of that plasma is water. But you have some proteins, dissolved salts, and other substances like O2, CO2, waste products, hormones, and nutrients that are being transported in it. This picture is again showing the centrifuged blood sample. And this picture comes from, in your textbook, in the additional pieces that were added, and this is on 515E. And it's showing the structure and function of the blood and what is suspended in the plasma. On the left side, you're looking at the plasma, which is 55%, and it talks about, on the left side, what are the pieces or the particles inside the plasma. And you can see there's water, and its purpose is to carry the substances as a solvent. You've got ions, which are blood electrolytes. Those get measured. It controls pH. It also monitors osmosis and helps fluid flowing back and forth. You've got plasma proteins, immunoglobulins or antibodies. They help with clotting, defense, and then a couple other substances like nutrients, glucose, fatty acids, vitamins, hormones, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. On the right side are the cellular elements. And red blood cells make up the bulk, and that's why it's red. 5 to 6 million red blood cells. And then the leukocytes, which are white blood cells. And here they're showing 5 different types, and they're very important in defense and immunity. So we're going to be looking at them in more detail when we talk about the immune system. But you will be looking at these underneath the microscope, and the pictures that they're showing here are very close to what they're going to look like underneath the scope, except it's a little harder to tell. And then platelets, you can see these also underneath the microscope with the slide that you'll be looking at, and they're just chips. They are not cells. They don't have a nucleus, as also red blood cells do not have a nucleus. They live 120 days, red blood cells. The platelets are important in clotting. So blood cells, red blood cells, are erythrocytes. You need to know that term. They have hemoglobin for carrying the oxygen and carbon dioxide. And remember, hemoglobin has iron in it. And that's why you need iron in your diet, or you become anemic, and then you don't carry oxygen as well. But red blood cells have no nucleus when they're mature. So they live for a total of about 3 months, 120 days. 4 months, sorry. And they are constantly being replaced by the bone marrow, which is where they're made. White blood cells are also called leukocytes. You need to know that term too. And they're important for defense against pathogens or invaders, and maintenance and repair. Now here's a picture of a red blood cell. And they cut it in half so you can see how it sort of looks like a frisbee. The inner center area is not as thick as the outer portion, and it carries oxygen and carbon dioxide. It picks up the oxygen in the lungs, delivers oxygen to all the cells, is also picking up carbon dioxide to take it back to the lungs. It contains iron-rich hemoglobin, and they are being made constantly to keep up with the replacement of them. They're made in the bone marrow. Now here is a picture of a red blood cell inside a capillary. And this picture I put in because I thought it showed a really nice picture. You can see the size of the red blood cell inside the capillary. This is a cut right through a capillary, and it's as if you're looking through the capillary. And the red blood cell is touching the capillary wall, and that helps the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide to get through the one epithelial tissue cell it's got to get through to get to the other side. They can't replicate. They don't go through mitosis since they don't have a nucleus. But they are being constantly made in the bone marrow. So there's no lack of red blood cells. Platelets are not cells. They are actually a chip off a stem cell that comes from the bone marrow. So a cell that was in the bone marrow broke off little pieces and puts those pieces inside the blood, and they function for clotting. This is the end of this section, and there will be one more that follows.